So I'm Tina Fallon. I am an agent here at Realty Collective. I have been part of Realty Collective for 18 years. Realty Collective was started by Victoria Alexander to defy the stereotypes that are associated with real estate in New York City. And we are basically your therapist. We are your coach. We're your sounding board to help you get through this extremely stressful process, which is selling in New York City. The first and best thing that we can do to help you along that journey is to introduce you to a trustworthy and reliable real estate attorney. In this case, it's Michelle Tepper. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. Really great to meet you. I'm Michelle Tepper. I specialize in New York City residential real estate. It's what I do all day, every day. I can't stress how important it is to have a good real estate attorney on your team. Somebody that really does New York City real estate. People bring in all sorts of outside people. Oh, my uncle, my cousin. You really want a real estate professional, and that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing for over 20 years. I love what I do. I get to meet great clients, but New York City is a very complex market, and you really need someone who understands it and can do the ins and outs. And I look forward to any challenges you have, but hopefully I just give you a smooth deal and take some of that stress off of you so that you can pack your stuff and be ready to sell, and I can do all the fun, legal, annoying work that you don't have to worry about. So I look forward to meeting all of you in the future and here to help. Right back at you. We can't hear you, Christina. Tina, you're on a mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So thank you, Michelle. We start these off, we want to find out why people are selling, like what is leading you to sell now. We have a few different ideas and you can jump in the chat. Are you selling because you want to upgrade to a larger space, or maybe you're downgrading to something smaller, big transition in your life? If you have a property that you feel like now is the right time to sell, so something that the market is really interested in, if you are no longer want to worry about. So let's say you have inherited a property from somebody, or you own a multifamily property and you're just tired of being a landlord. There's a lot of reasons why a person might want to sell. And one thing that we always point out to people is that there are some better times to sell, some worse times to sell, but sometimes you've just got to sell. And so we are always here to put together a plan to sell your home that's going to get you from point A to point B. Point A is where you are now, and point B is comfortably settled in the next stage of your life. Along the way, there's going to be a transaction. The transaction is the sale of your property, but we like to keep our eyes on A, where you are right now, and B, where you want to get at the end of this process, so that we can tailor it to suit your needs. There is no one size fits all process for selling a home. Every single home is idiosyncratic. Every single seller is different. And so we want you to be really clear with us from the beginning about what your needs are so that we can coach you along the way. So things to consider when you're thinking about selling. The market has been in a pretty constant state of flux over the past few years. We saw a big bump in New York City real estate coming out of the pandemic when interest rates were very low. We've seen a real leveling off of activity in the market since then, but there does continue to be pretty low inventory throughout the city. So if you have a desirable property, we are matching properties with buyers, even though interest rates have gone up and the costs of home ownership have really skyrocketed for buyers. So those are all things you want to take into consideration. If you have a property that can be priced correctly, positioned, it's always a good time to sell. So factors, though, that are going to make a difference for you, and I'm going to hand this over to Michelle in just a second. We like to talk about your break-even horizon. So even if you bought your home for a certain amount of money, you're selling it for more than that, the costs associated with homeowners, with buying and selling homes are so high in New York that it can take around 5 years to more or less to get to the point where you've accrued enough equity in the home that you can sell at a profit. Michelle, what are some of the other considerations that make the transaction fees so substantial in New York?
Yeah, so I find that you can hear me, that sellers are often surprised by there are some substantial fees with selling. Now, you can sell at a great profit right now. Real estate in New York is really doing well. So I do encourage you to sell if you're ready and if you have a great property. But some things to consider are transfer taxes, which is a tax that New York City and New York State imposes on your sale of the property. It's about 1.425% for New York City, and then another 1% approximately, a little bit less for New York State. So you're going to want to budget that in, just knowing that you have to pay those transfer taxes. A second fee is if you live in a co-op specifically, they have what's called a flip tax, and that's often 1% or 2% of your purchase price. Of sometimes it's the net purchase price, sometimes it's the full purchase price, or some co-ops or even condos have a set closing fee, a $5,000 fee or a $1,000 fee. But you want to ask your building about those flip taxes or transfer fees that they charge. The next thing is that if you have a mortgage on the property, of course, you're going to have to pay off your mortgage. And if you have a home equity line of credit, that's a second mortgage. We also need to make sure that is paid. And if it is a co-op, you have to order that through the bank's local counsel. So me as your attorney would order that, but then they're going to send an attorney to the closing. So not only are you paying off your mortgage, but you're also going to pay that attorney about $800 to come to the closing. Another important one is obviously your realtor. That's who's going to get you the best deal ever. But of course, they need to be compensated. And I know there's been a lot of conversations in New York right now about buyers and sellers and who should pay the broker commission or the realtor commission. And we could probably get into that a little bit more. But right now, as it stands, New York City hasn't really been affected by all that. And it still really stands that the seller is paying the commission, usually about a 6% commission. So you want to budget for that real estate commission. It is so absolutely worth it to have a realtor, though. They're going to get you such a better price, and they're going to do the board package and make sure that your buyer gets approved and that you didn't take it off the market for a long time and waste any time. So you really want to have a top-notch professional realtor and not cut corners with the commission there just to get somebody in place. The last thing is capital gains. If you owe federal capital gains, those are paid the next tax year to the federal government. But if you moved outside of New York and this was not your primary residence for the last few years, you'll actually have to pay the New York estimated capital gains at the time of the closing, and then you can file a return and get any overage back. If you're staying in New York, then you're treated just like the federal, and you can pay those capital gains that you owe or may or may not owe on your next tax cycle when you file your next tax return. So those are some of the major ones. Other than that, there's small building fees like a move out deposit and a move out fee, and maybe just we talked about a closing fee, things like that, but nothing, those are not the substantial numbers that you need to be too concerned with. So I know that was a lot of numbers, but once you have an attorney and approximately your sales price, feel free to reach out to them. They can give you an estimate, maybe not down to the dollar, but within a couple $100, so you really know what you're looking at and make sure that this is worth it for you in the sale.
Thanks, Michelle. And if it isn't worth it, because it might not be, you in New York City, even if you own a co-op, if you've owned it for a long period of time, you may be able to rent the property out. There's other things that you can do besides sell right away in many cases. And so we really like to know what you need to get out of this transaction. And if we feel like the market conditions are not right for that, let's talk through some other options that you might have. Maybe you need to get some cash and you could take out a home equity line of credit as opposed to selling the whole home if we're not going to be able to get you the number that you need. We are not here to tell everybody that they need to be selling their homes. We at Realty Collective frequently talk people out of selling if it's not the right timing for them. So please just be honest and direct with your attorney and your real estate agent about what your expectations are, because what we don't want to do is put a lot of energy into selling your home only to have you be disappointed by the result. And I think that's really true throughout. Please be clear about anything that you might need, any questions that you might have about this process, because having real transparency with the people who are on your team is going to be crucial to getting a good result for you as a seller. Another key element about whether now is a good time for you to sell is your property, what people are looking for. Do you have desirable amenities? Do you live in a big condo building that has gyms and swimming pool? Are those amenities unbelievably expensive? That's another question. Are you in a location that is desirable for people? We can't advise about things like schools, but you will find buyers who are very specifically oriented around school districts. Those are things to be mindful of. We've seen a lot more working from home since the pandemic. And so do you have an extra room or a space where people can work? There's timing considerations that's on this list. So are you selling, for example, like it's funny that we're doing this one in November, is that I say there's always a good time to you can always put a property on the market. The one time of year I would recommend not putting a property on the market is between Thanksgiving and New Year's. But we can talk, but this is a great time to be prepping for a sale, if not a great time to be putting something on the market. People are just really distracted and tend not to be thinking about their new homes during this period of time. But if you absolutely need to sell right now, then there's a marketing plan for that as well. Do you have outdoor space, something people are really enthusiastic about? School performance, I mentioned. We're seeing people who are interested in multifamily homes. As I mentioned, interest rates are very high right now. And so sometimes people are looking for a little bit of income from a rental unit in their building to offset the cost of home ownership. And parking. If you've got parking, we can sell your home. I can sell your home on Christmas Day if you have parking. That's something to take into consideration. If, on the other hand, you have a home that doesn't have any of this, that you inherited something that has been in disrepair, that somebody smoked in for 20 years, there are marketing plans for that as well. Sometimes it means we've got to do a little work on the home before we put it on the market, which is something that we can talk about later. But remember that you only need one buyer for your home. We're not looking to scale up your property and sell it to a mass market. So we can find somebody out there for you if now is the time that you have to sell. All right, so the next, do you have a plan for after you sell? So this, I think, is really crucial, and one of the things that we hit on pretty hard in this presentation is where are you going? What is your timeline? And what's your bottom line? If you are planning on moving out of state, as Michelle mentioned, there are certain considerations in terms of costs that you'll have at your closing. If you are planning on staying in the city but upgrading to a larger home, if you're going to be downsizing into something smaller, these are all things that we need to know. And also, do you need the proceeds from the sale of this home in order to make that move? Because if that's the case, then we're going to be looking at you staying in the home after, or moving into a rental unit after the sale before you make your next purchase. So these are all things that we really want to know going into it so that we can build both the sort of like legal structure that you need around the sale and the marketing structure that you need. And as we mentioned, what's your bottom line? If I'm not going to sell it unless I'm going to clear $500,000, then that is something that everybody on your team needs to know ahead of time, in part because Michelle can help you understand what that number really is, less all of your closing costs, and also what your real cost basis is. So Michelle, I know we don't always get into this, but is that something that you can talk about a little bit?
The cost basis?
Yeah.
Sure. There's different cost basis that you're going to look at for the purposes of taxes. They're going to look at the gains, and you can write off a certain amount of gain if you're married or if you're single. I believe it's $250,000 on the sale of your primary home if you're single, and $500,000 if you're not married. So that gain won't count against you, and so you can not pay taxes on that. If it's above that, you're going to pay taxes. As far as within a building, I think we talked about flip taxes before, and some buildings look at what the gain was on your sale and then tax you on that, whereas some buildings just have a straight, whatever the purchase price is, we're going to take 1% of that purchase price. Different buildings have different structures, and that's something you can easily find out even without speaking to your attorney by just asking your managing agent. But of course, if you know your property and you want to get these numbers done, reach out to one of us and we can get that information for you as well. It's really important so you understand how they're calculating all of these closing costs so you know what you're netting at the end.
And Michelle, what are you estimating right now? Because I know it's been fluctuating a lot. What is roughly the timeline from the time you put the property on the market until you're seeing deals close?
That's actually why I unmuted myself before. I wanted to jump in on timeline. And timeline is so critical because everybody puts it on the market and either they want to sell and they want to move in 5 months, but they got a buyer right away, or they want to sell in a month, but it doesn't take a month. So let's be realistic here. If you're having a buyer with financing, so if they are taking a mortgage, no matter what, you're really looking at a minimum of 60 days. Can it happen sooner? Yes, but I'd say budget at least 60 days. And that's in the case of a condo. If it's a co-op, I'd say it's really about a 90-day close period from when you have your accepted offer until we can really close. That's because the buyer needs to go get their mortgage commitment letter, which takes about 45 days to get, and then they can first ask for approval at the building, and then we go through the process of getting the approval and schedule a closing date. If you have a cash buyer with a condo, I'd say you're still looking at 30 to 45 days if everything goes perfect. And with a co-op, your best case scenario is still about 60 days. So I want you guys to plan ahead and really know that you're looking at 2 to 3 months before you're closing. So if you know that you're buying a new place in a month and you need that money, you're probably going to need to talk to your mortgage broker about a bridge loan or something like that. Flip side, if you don't know where you're going, you should know that it's about 60 to 90 days and you should start looking, even if that is a short-term rental or family and putting your stuff in storage or whatever that may be. But I'd say like the 90 days is approximately what I'm really seeing in the co-op world and 60 days in the condo world. That's
Thanks.
sure.
Yeah, I think that's true. And just pointing out, that's 60 to 90 days that starts from the time that you have your signed contract. So
Oh,
that's not from the first day that you put the home on the market. That is actually after you've put the home on the market, you've gone through a bidding process, and you've had the home inspected. There's been a lot of contract negotiation back and forth. So it isn't 60 days from the day we list it, it's 60 days from the contract signing.
correct. And one more thing to jump in on there. From when you accept an offer, let's say you find the perfect buyer and you accept their offer, it still takes about 7 to 10 days to get into contract because that new buyer is going to do their inspection. They're going to do their due diligence on the building, which means read the building's financials and the board minutes and all that fun stuff. And the attorneys are going to work out the contract. So even from the day you accept the offer, it's not 60 to 90 days, but it's going to be another week after that because they need to get into contract, which is about a week later.
Agreed. And one way that you can keep that process on track, I know we're going to get to this in another slide, but I feel like we should probably do it right now, is let's talk about what kind of documents that you as a seller need to have in hand before you put your home, before you can go into contract, and ideally before you put your home on the market.
Absolutely. So as there's an accepted offer, woohoo, now the buyer's attorney comes in and they're going to do what's called due diligence. And that due diligence, as I mentioned and I referenced a few minutes ago, is really reviewing the building and doing their homework. So what are they going to want to see? They're going to need that big document you got when you bought called the offering plan, whether you have it digitally or if you have an electronic version with all the amendments. We're going to need to provide that. Second, you're going to want the last 2 to 3 years of financials. So most buildings right now are on their 2023 financials and then the 2022 financials. And if you have the 2021, then great. Some attorneys are also going to ask for the 2024 budget, which is the current budget. And other documents you're going to need to have ready are maybe the purchase application, if your building has an alterations agreement, the policy for doing renovations, the house rules, and if they have a sublet policy. And if you can provide all of that in a clean package, generally electronically, now it's not really so much hard copy, to your agent and to your attorney before you even have an accepted offer, they can email that over to the buyer's attorney day one, the minute you have an accepted offer. And now there's no delay for them to collect those documents and they can start doing their due diligence right away. But if we wait until you have an accepted offer to first start collecting those documents and asking the managing agent and paying the fee to get the documents you don't have, that could add another 3 or 4 or 5 days in this. And then you might lose a buyer who's also still looking at other properties at the same time. So in advance, you really can reach out to your managing agent. If you need a list of these documents, we can tell you in advance and collect all that and just have them on a Dropbox file or somewhere easy where we can email them out right away.
Thank you. It's so helpful. And for all of us involved in this process, this is something where it's never too soon to start thinking about. If you're thinking about selling your home, you're thinking about doing it in a year, you're thinking about doing it in 2 years, reach out because your attorney and your real estate agent can be really helpful to you at this point in the process. Like I've worked with people where it's taken 7 years to get a property actually listed just because various things happened in their lives. That additional lead up time is really beneficial to everybody. So it's never too soon to be reaching out to the people on your team. So let's say you've decided to sell. We haven't talked you out of selling with all
I
of
have
them.
one more point, actually, just while we're on these topics of what we should be prepared with.
Yeah.
There's no secrets here. They're going to discover everything in due diligence anyways. If you know there's an upcoming assessment, if you know that they're about to do the roof or the windows or anything like that, please tell your agent and your attorney about it so that we can tell the other side so that their offer already includes that. There's nothing worse than having an accepted offer and then they go do their due diligence. Now they come back and they're going to really knock you on the price and say, well, we like the apartment, but we want $20,000 off because you didn't tell us there's an assessment. We get so much better with just being upfront and getting the right offer at the right time for the right buyer so that they have all the information instead of us wasting time with the buyer for a week for them to just walk away because we didn't tell them about something we all knew about. So I cannot stress how important it is to be transparent. And if anything financially about the building, maybe it might not be shared. Maybe your attorney and the broker might decide not to share it, but please be upfront and honest and transparent about all of that so we can make those decisions and help you get the best offer. You're on mute. Tina, you're on mute.
I know. I don't know. I pushed something on again, I'm not used to doing this from my phone. Sorry, everybody. One other piece about that is that we will go through as soon as we get the address from you that you are selling. We'll go through the public records and see if there are, for example, any violations, anything on the property that you may not even know about, any open permits. This has actually come up a couple of times this year for me with clients who had done properly permitted renovation work, and because of some paperwork error or something, just a little oversight, the permit was not properly closed out. These are things we want to know again in advance, because you do not want to give leverage to your potential buyers. And we want to know everything in advance so that we can hang on to whatever buyers we have. What Michelle was just talking about, that sort of you go through the 7 to 10 days with a buyer and have them walk away. An accepted offer is not legally binding in New York State and in New York City. And if that buyer walks away, we have to go back to the drawing board. There may have been another offer that was almost as good, but those buyers have already moved on to something else. So time really is the big deal killer here in New York. And the good news for you is that accepted offer not being legally binding means that if another better offer comes along, you are free to move on to something else. If you've got a buyer who's dragging their feet and another buyer comes in, or if you don't like the way somebody's finances look and a cash buyer comes in, you do have that flexibility. But everything that we can do to be prepared with the documentation that is going to come up in that due diligence period, everything we do in advance is going to give you more leverage when it comes time to negotiate. Okay, so we're selling. What are we doing next? We are assembling your team. Obviously, Michelle and I are a real estate agent and an attorney. But this is, I think, another thing that's really important to do in advance is really interview people, to give yourself the time, because you are going to be on the phone with us, on email, in person with us, and you're spending an enormous amount of time with the people on your team. And you want to make sure that this is somebody who you have clear communication with, who you feel is going to be able to fulfill your expectations for the property, that has an answer for the questions that you have. And one thing that we'll include in the chat some questions you can ask real estate brokers. But one thing is just to make sure that person is an expert. And they can be experts in a lot of different things. If you're selling a home that is if you're selling a house in Brighton Beach, I am not the agent for you. For example, you really want somebody who understands that market, who works a lot in that market. There are a lot of brokers there who are not members of REBNY. There's a lot of interesting sort of rules and around that. We have people we can refer you to, but I might not be the right agent for that. So make sure you get somebody who isn't just somebody who you like, but somebody who knows how to sell what you're selling. You definitely want somebody who understands what's happening in the market right now. There's been so many different shifts that are happening. My dog is going to make squeaky noises right now. There's a lot of things that are happening. Again, ask us questions around what's happening with commissions, because there's been a lot of interesting things and a lot of, I think, inconsistent information that's been made available to sellers. But this is something that you do need to know ahead of time and negotiate with your broker. And then you really want somebody who is going to communicate with you in the way you like to communicate. We have really great sort of virtual project management software that we use with our clients. Some people don't want to do that. Some people would rather just email. Some people want to text. Some people want to talk on the phone. Whatever your style is, we are going to adapt to it. And some people want an update at the end of every showing. Some people want to be left alone. Make sure you're really clear with us about how you want to be communicated with, and make sure you find somebody who has an answer for that. So sometimes somebody has a big team and you don't know who's going to be showing the house at any point in time, or somebody works for a really big company. Our company is a small boutique company. We do not have shareholders. Our fiduciary duty is to our clients. But you may want somebody with a bigger name. There's a broker for everybody. And I would argue there's a real estate attorney for everybody. So Michelle, what are you looking for in a real estate attorney?
I actually always tell my clients that they should talk to them, and it's almost like dating. I'm going to laugh, but you should get along with each other. You should, do you want someone who's going to be able to take the calls immediately? Do you want someone who's going to text you? Do you want someone who's going to email with you? Obviously, that's just saying your mode of communication. But also, do you like someone who works quickly? Do you want someone who wants to meet with you in person? There's so many different things, but what you really want to look for, more importantly than any communication styles, is their experience. Do they do real estate? As I alluded to at the beginning of this, If they do tax law in New Jersey, they are not going to be your real estate attorney. New York is its own animal. It really is so different. Everything anybody knows about real estate in the rest of the country does not apply in New York, and anything that applies in New York does not apply to the rest of the country. So please make sure whoever you're hiring is a New York City real estate attorney. I, for example, live in New Jersey. I hired an attorney for my own home purchase to buy in New Jersey because I do New York City real estate, and it does not make sense to me what New Jersey does because that's not New York. So you want an expert in New York and Brooklyn and Queens, in the boroughs. You want someone who really does this day in and out, specifically when you're doing condos and co-ops. If it's a townhouse, it could be a little bit more similar. You could use someone outside, but co-ops and condos have a million nuances and rules and complications and new and backdoors and all sorts of things. And you really want an attorney who does this day in and day out. So I think that's the most important, other than also just having a call with them, getting along with them, making sure you guys feel like you vibe, and because you're going to talk to each other a lot during those 2 months while you're going through this transaction. That's what I got.
Agreed. Agreed. Yes. And it does, you can get recommendations from people from friends of yours who've been through this process recently. But if you can, take your time to make this decision, then I think it's a little bit easier than being rushed. You do not want to regret your choice of real estate agent or of attorney. So let's say you've assembled your team. This is great. You've gone through, you make sure you've got all the documentation that you need, and you're starting to get your property ready to go to market. We're going to work on soliciting buyers. The way we approach it at Realty Collective is really in the sense of storytelling. So I come from a background in film and theater production. I feel like when we are doing this together with our clients, it's like we're making a little movie or we're putting on a play. What's the story that we're telling? Who's the cast of characters? And the home, the building, the property that you're selling is really the set itself. And it needs to tell a consistent story. The copy that we have associated with it, our documentation associated with it, the staging of the home needs to be pretty consistent. So if you have something that is an absolute wreck, as I mentioned, there was a smoker who had 10 cats, we're not going to stage that as if it was the Taj Mahal. That's not the story that we're going to tell around that. We're going to tell a story of an estate conditioned home, and the buyers who we're going to solicit for that are people who are intending to put a lot of equity into the home itself once they purchase it. So it needs to be priced accordingly. And we also need to talk about it in that way. I don't know if you've seen any of these virtual staging things where people will show like a virtual renovation. When someone shows up in the home, in the apartment, in the house that you're selling, it needs to look like the photographs that we are presenting. Everybody starts their search online, and if there is an inconsistency between what they've been looking at online, and they will refresh that page, they'll show it to their friends, they'll look at it hundreds of times before they actually show up in your place. And if we're inconsistent in our storytelling around that, you've just wasted all of that time getting somebody into your home, because they're going to turn and walk away and look for something.
They feel duped at that point, and they don't trust you. Yeah,
they
buying a home is so personal, and selling a home is so
Yeah.
personal because you love your home, but buying a home is so personal too, and you want to go in with a good feeling to start because you're giving away all this money. And if you feel tricked from the start, you're just not going to want to negotiate a higher price or come and meet somewhere in the middle. So you really need to just be upfront from the start.
Agree.
And that includes the staging and having it look just like the pictures online.
And so if you know that there's some issues if there's some issues that are relatively minor that we can address, these are things that we do with our clients. I just sold a house for some clients who live in Virginia, and there was some boiler leaked, for example, and we had to replace the boiler. Like, I was there, they weren't there, they were in Virginia. So if we have to replace the boiler, by the time we were showing the home, it was in the summer, so it didn't matter that the boiler was, but we had to present that as, and the boiler is going to be fixed by the end of the summer. That was something that I was able to help them work both financially and also overseeing that process. Light renovation, painting, things that we need to do to just get something to zhuzh it up and make it look better for buyers. Those are things that your agent can do for you. Some people charge for it. Some people don't charge for it. We're a small company, so part of our pitch is that we provide staging free of charge or with just the cost of moving. That's something that gives us a kind of leg up on some of the bigger places, but you may want to go all out and spend $40,000 doing like a big high-end staging of your home. Almost always you'll get that money back. Some people don't have it up front. So what I would really warn against is virtual staging. So I know some people like to do it, but it is really more about trust, as Michelle was saying, than it is about helping people imagine what their home would look like. Okay, so we've got everything set. We've got everything staged. We took great photographs. We've got great floor plans, and we've had our first open house. We are and now, because we did such a great job aligning the price and the marketing and the staging of the home, we're getting multiple offers in the beginning. Now, this is not always happening. Buyers have been really skittish in this market. We've seen people come and go and come and go from the market. And interest rates, when they dip, we start to see people come back. Interest rates have been on a rise a little bit lately. So people were waiting out the election. There's all kinds of things. Like, it is very vibes driven for buyers. But if we've done everything right, we should be able to solicit some offers from folks on those first few showings. So sometimes the first offer that comes in, you'll say, oh no, I priced it too low because I got a full asking price offer on my first offer. Please do take that offer seriously. If you get a full asking price offer, it means you've priced it very well, not you haven't underpriced it. And those first buyers are frequently people who have been outbid on other properties. They really understand the market almost as well as we as brokers, maybe sometimes better than we as brokers do, because they're deep in it and they're serious about the home. Do not look.
There's no one more excited than a buyer who got burned on their last deal because they got outbid. So the next deal, they're coming in hot, they're ready to go, they want to get their due diligence done. So those buyers that first offer is often someone who's very serious.
Yeah, and those motivated buyers are going to help us with what we've been talking about, which is keeping the timing moving quickly. That's my cat. So take that first offer seriously. Sometimes you'll get a first offer from somebody, though, that's a little low. And it can feel really insulting. You've put all of this hard work in, and then you think, did we miscalculate? What did we do wrong? Always counter those offers and stay in communication with those buyers. There are buyers who simply want to see that they didn't overpay for it, and they will start low because they want to make sure that they're paying the sort of lowest amount of money they possibly could for the home. It's an understandable mindset among buyers, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to end up coming up to the number that you want. So we always say, counter, please don't be insulted. Everybody's going to go about this process their own way. Everybody's like on their own trip, right? And those buyers might end up becoming the right buyers. Try not to be insulted if their methodology doesn't line up with our methodology. So as a broker, I'm always going to try to negotiate every single deal into as good a shape as it possibly can be so that I can present those offers to you as the seller and you can make real comparisons between them, because it really doesn't just come down to price. There's all your other offering terms that are going to be at least as meaningful to you.
Some of those, just real quick to interrupt, like we talked about earlier, is it a cash buyer or is it a mortgage buyer? So and tied to that is the timing. If you need to move quickly and you've got a cash offer, but it's $10,000 less, you're going to get out, that's going to probably save you money in the long term. You might want to take that offer, even if it's a little bit less for a cash buyer, things like that. So you need to look at the full offer, not just the number. You need to look at how qualified this buyer is, how likely are they going to be approved by your co-op or condo board, all of that fun stuff as well.
Yeah, it really matters. And especially if you're in a co-op, you're going to have to review pretty closely. The offer forms for co-ops are often more in-depth. They will include a more detailed financial statement from the buyers. It's also one of the reasons why you want to pay a buyer's broker, especially if you're operating at the high end. You may be working with a potential buyer who has been working with their broker for years. So this is somebody who has worked really hard to get this buyer into good shape, to make this buyer the best possible buyer we can have. And also somebody who's going to work hard to keep this deal on the rails. A great buyer's agent is very valuable, and I think worth the kind of finder's fee that the brokerage commission represents. And then also I think I know that if somebody comes with a broker representing them, that broker is not going to waste their time with somebody who isn't going to be able to close this deal. So even just having somebody representing that person is a really good sign for me that I'm not going to spend a lot of time educating this buyer and then finding out, oh, actually, they only have 10% to put down and they haven't been employed for the past 6 months and they've been living off of a family trust or something like that. That's going to make them less appealing to, say, a co-op board. So these are things where all the rest of the terms of that offer matter at least as much as the price when it comes to actually getting the deal closed. All right, we've negotiated, we've picked a deal, and we have sent out deal sheets. So we, the agents, send a deal sheet out to the attorney for the buyer and the attorney for the seller that memorializes the agreed upon terms of the sale. So are they doing financing? Are they going to be doing an inspection? Those kinds of things. And then we send it over to the attorneys, and the attorneys get started. If we have these documents that we discussed earlier, we as agents will share those with the attorneys so that they can get started on this. And if we don't have them, we're madly scrambling to get them while the attorney begins work on the contract. Which work entails.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were on me. Yeah. Okay. As Tina said, sorry. We get the deal sheet. That's the green light when the attorneys really turn on their jets and when we really get started. If you're the buyer's attorney, you're doing the due diligence like we discussed. But if you're the seller's attorney, and since this is a selling Brooklyn conversation, what do you need to do? As soon as we get that deal sheet, the first thing we want to do is get a contract out to the other side. So we're going to need to put in all the terms that were agreed upon that were from the deal sheet. We're also going to need to include things like what legal name is on the deed. So we're going to need to have a copy of your deed. We can pull a copy, but if you have one, great. Especially if you're selling and you're a trust, or if it's an estate, like you're the executor, we need to have a copy of all those estate documents so we know exactly the right name to put on the contract. It's obviously critical that the seller is the correct legal seller. If it's a co-op, we need to know how many shares you have. So if you have a copy of your stock certificate, or if you don't have one, you can ask your managing agent for a copy. That's very helpful to us as well, to know the number of shares. If it's a condo, we need to know your percentage of ownership, because that's how they figure out your monthly common charges. So if like we're 0.2% of the condo or anything of that sort. So the attorney needs all of that, along with a contract is not going to be signed until after the buyer does their inspection and their due diligence. If you guys agreed upon any repairs, if you know the sink is broken and you disclosed it to them and you're going to have a plumber fix it or anything like that, or you know that the refrigerator doesn't really work, if we're promising to make any repairs, then we need to make sure that's in the contract. Everything goes in. Of course, the buyer's way more concerned that it's in the contract because they want to make sure that gets done. But anything that is agreed upon between the parties, please let us know. And that's how we put this contract together and send it over to the buyer's attorney. I usually turn that around within 24 hours, if not less, because I don't want the buyers to have any reason for delay to get that contract back to me. Along with the contract is a rider that has any extra terms. And so I send over a contract and a rider. The process is then the buyer's attorney will mark it up, make any changes they have, and then put together their own purchaser's rider, send it back to me as the seller's attorney. I'll mark that up and send it back to them. The truth is that the contract can really be done in 2 to 3 days. It doesn't need to take the whole week. What we're really waiting on is that due diligence. So critically is getting those due diligence documents them first, and then within 24 hours, getting that contract to them.
Agreed. And if your buyer is seeking to do an inspection, which in most cases they will be doing, that's something we want to get out of the way really quickly. Most attorneys are not going to let you do the inspection after the contract signing. So we do want to know, we want to get that scheduled as soon as we can. So keeping the home in showing condition while we get ready for the inspection is important. And as Michelle mentioned, if there's anything that we know isn't working, like the refrigerator's on the fritz or there's a problem with the sink, those things are really good to disclose ahead of time. They will come out eventually. So if we say, oh, there's this thing and it's going to be addressed by the time we close, then that's something that we can make as part of the deal sheet, and we don't even need to add it later. If there's something new that comes up during the inspection, so even somebody who knows their home really well, sometimes something will come up that we didn't anticipate, and making sure that we can address that either by curing it during the contract process. So now we just found out that the dishwasher fails on the day that we're doing the inspection. We can say, look, we're going to replace the dishwasher, or we will repair the dishwasher. If it's something that you don't feel that you have the wherewithal to actually address, sometimes you can have a credit that you are giving at closing to the buyer so that they can choose their own dishwasher. So if they're planning on doing a renovation anyway, sometimes they don't want you to fix things. But those are things that we want to be able to make sure we negotiate really quickly in clear communication with the attorneys, in clear communication with clients, so that doesn't slow down the contract process. All right. So now everybody worked so hard. We got it into contract in less than a week because we setting a
Yeah, your
land
A
speed
team.
record for contract. And then you may be tempted to relax because you've done all of this work. But in fact, the process continues for you. You can take a breath for a little bit after you have a signed contract. If a signed contract means that it will be, if the person decides not to pursue this purchase, that the 10% that they have put down at the contract signing that is in your attorney's IOLA account can be liquidated to you. I don't want to get in the weeds about that, but I'm just saying contract is good. It is legally binding. Now you're in a legally binding relationship with this buyer. And we talked through the various timeframes that this could take. So let's say you said, you know what, we really want to move quickly. We went with a cash buyer who was offering a little less money so that we can close we want to close by the end of 2024. We put it on the market at a fire sale amount. We want to close in that period of time. Michelle, what are your rights as a seller at that point to keep it to, say, a 30-day or a 45-day process?
Okay, so most contract dates in New York are called an on or about date. So you'll see, let's say you decided the closing date should be December 1st. You'll see in front of the words December 1st, you'll see on or about. That on or about is actually a legal term in New York, even though it sounds like a wiggly term. It's a legal term that gives you an extra 30 days. Now, that gives you as the seller an extra 30 days. Let's say you thought you'd be out by November 30th so we could close on the 1st, or if let's say you need to extend to December 15th or December 20th, as the seller, you have 30 more days, but the buyer also has that same wiggle room. December is a bad example because we're probably not closing anything on December 30th or 31st, but just using December 1st as a date, on or about gives you an extra 30 days. If you and in that 30 days, nobody's paying any penalties. So it's not like you can keep their deposit now and say, forget it, you didn't close on December 1st. That on or about language gives both sides a little room to live their life and have the attorneys all figure out a date that works for everybody, especially if they were not a cash buyer and there's a bank. We need to make sure the bank is ready too. So that on or about gives everyone a little wiggle room. If you need to make sure we are closing on a specific date, we can put that in the contract on or before. At that point, if that date happens, then there can be penalties like they pay your daily carrying costs, a per diem daily cost of, let's say you live in a condo, your daily common charges and real estate taxes. If it's a co-op, your monthly maintenance and any other fees you're paying, your insurance. So there are ways to structure it, but the norm in New York is on or about closing date. So when you get that signed contract in hand, woohoo, and on or about December 1st, it does not mean you are closing on December 1st. It means we're going to target December 1st and we're going to close within 30 days. And I know sometimes sellers get wary of that, but it also helps on the sell side when you need an extra few days to move your stuff out or you need an extra few days to get into your new place. So just know that closing dates are there. I think you asked what circumstances you can keep a deposit though. If somebody has signed a contract and now refusing to close after that additional 30 days, at that point, we can say they are in default of the contract, and there might be circumstances where you can keep your deposit. Additionally, if they decide they no longer want the apartment, that is on them. They have put a 10% deposit down when they signed the contract, and you are now, if they cancel, entitled to keep their 10% deposit. Two scenarios, though, where you don't get to keep their deposit, even though the contract is canceled, and that is if the bank denies the loan during the mortgage contingency period, during that first 45 days, if the bank denies the loan for a good reason, the buyer acted in good faith, but the bank denies the loan and we have to cancel, they get to cancel and take their 10% back. Or in the unfortunate case, if a co-op board denies them, that's not their fault so long as they've acted in good faith and represented everything truthfully. And under those circumstances, they can cancel the contract. So there's sometimes when you do keep it, and sometimes when we know in advance that those are scenarios where they wouldn't be able to keep it. I think otherwise, assuming all goes great, we get to the last point on your slide there, which is closing the deal. So
Closing the deal, yes.
that's the highlight and that's the goal.
It is the goal. So one thing that can happen is that sometimes people are super motivated, and the day after they get the day after the contract is signed, they start packing their house. They've moved everything out, and then we still have to do an appraisal. For example, if there is a mortgage involved, we are waiting for the mortgage commitment letter from the bank, and if somebody has that financing contingency, they have to back out of the deal, and you have to give them back their 10% deposit, we have to start this process over again. Hopefully we have some backup buyers who we can go to immediately and we can get this process going really quickly. But chances are we're going to have to do another round of showings and we're going to start over again. So I think there's a delicate balance between being prepared to move and also keeping the home in showing condition until you get that commitment letter from the bank that indicates that they are clear to close. And now you can really start taking this. Now you got to take your move really seriously. So what you do have to do before we close the deal is you do have to move out of the home, unless we have negotiated a deal that enables you to stay in the home post closing. We can talk about that in just a minute, but you do have to move out, and you've packed, you've moved things. These are things that we can also help with. We know that moving is really traumatic, but we're going to help you with that. We've gotten the clear to close. The closing is scheduled, and then on our end, the agents need to schedule the final walkthrough. Within 48 hours of the scheduled closing, the buyer is going to come through with their agent and walk through the vacant home and make sure that everything is in the condition it was specified in the contract. Just in terms of if you've taken things off of the walls, if there was something that was attached to a wall, those are considered fixtures and those generally convey with the home. If there's something that you have to remove from a wall, we need to get permission to do so beforehand, unless we've included that if we've excluded those fixtures in the contract. That includes things like window coverings. If you have custom shades that you've put into the blinds that you've put into the home, those will convey unless we specifically exclude those. Chandeliers, you have something that is like a very special, precious chandelier that your grandmother gave you. Don't wait till the last minute to let us know that you're going to be taking that with you. That needs to go into the contract or be negotiated at some point before the closing. Also, you may move all your stuff out. If you've lived there for a long time, you forgot that you cut a gigantic hole in the wall behind your sideboard when you thought you were going to put the TV there. So we would love to know those things sooner. The holes in the wall can be no larger than a dime, and the condition of the home needs to be broom swept. So you don't need to do a full renovation of your home before the people move in. You don't even need to do a huge cleaning, although we do generally do that for our clients. We get their homes cleaned for them before the final walkthrough, but you do need to leave the premises in the condition that the buyers are going to be expecting. So that we do that walkthrough, and invariably, very rarely will we go through a walkthrough and nothing comes up. Oftentimes it's something quite small that can be addressed pretty easily. We've got some missing light bulbs. There's no smoke detector or CO2 detector. Those are things that if you do it the day before, we can come in and install those things and fix them for you and then send a video of them functioning to the attorneys. But sometimes something big comes up. There is that dishwasher that had been working during the inspection is now no longer working, and we need to negotiate how that's going to be addressed. And so we have a couple of different options in how we do that. Michelle, can you speak to that?
So if we get to the walkthrough and they find out, we're going to use the dishwasher example, we'll just keep going with the dishwasher this whole session. They go to test it that day, they turn it on, no water comes out. Okay, so presumably the walkthrough is not the morning of closing, because when it's the morning of closing, we have limited options. If we can do it at least a day or two before, we have a little more options. Option number one, say, we'll get it fixed. And you call the super right away and say, super, please come in here. I know this worked yesterday. I don't know why it just didn't work right now. And you have them look at it and fix it. And then we take a video of it working and show them that it's working. And then at closing, nothing has to happen. Okay, that would be best case scenario. So option number two is we realize, okay, you know what, it's been on the fritz for a while and you're right, it's not working now, and I'm going to replace it in good faith. And so you arrange to replace it and have it replaced in the next day or two. Or option number three is that at that point, because we're so close to closing, we agree on a credit. If you need to give a credit, technically the credit is for a like appliance of the same age and model. Now, if the dishwasher is 25 years old, you're supposed to credit for a dishwasher that's 25 years old, but you can't really purchase one of those. That's an arbitrary number. So at that point, we come up with about $500 for any appliance, because we're not going to say that dishwasher from 25 years ago is $100. So you're looking at $500, but if it's pretty new and it should be working, then they're probably going to ask for more close to real value, $700, $1,000. So we really have an obligation here to try to keep things in working order, to keep things in the same condition as when we went into contract. But of course, there are credits that are given at the closing table if need be. The key here is to really move your stuff out a day or two before so they can have that walkthrough. And so we're not scrambling on the day of closing, and you're not settling for a credit number that you don't like just to get this closed. The more time we have, the better a reasonable number and homework can be done so we can find a good solution for everybody. And these things happen, even with the best of intentions. These walkthrough items come up, but the better we can get ahead of them, the better we can do of getting you a proper, not having you give away so much money of your money as a credit.
Agreed. And then let's see, we've vacated, we've done the walkthrough, and then we're ready. You're going into the closing, and you're either going to be physically present or you are going to close under power of attorney. So how do you make that decision, Michelle?
Okay, so if the closing is, especially with a co-op and a condo, is often especially with the co-op, is at the managing agent's office in New York or in Brooklyn or wherever the managing agent is located. So you're going to need to be physically present. If you know that you can't, you're moving to Florida, you're going to be on vacation, or whatever the circumstance may be, even if you just have a busy job and you know that you can't be there, especially as the sellers, they don't feel as connected to being at the closing because you're not purchasing something, it's not your big deal. You can tell your attorneys that in advance, and they can draft what's called a power of attorney for you. And that power of attorney is limited specifically to this sale. So you're giving your attorney power of attorney, but they can't go do 10 other things for you. They can just sell this one apartment for you. They can then show up on your behalf at the closing and sign all the documents as if they were you. The buildings often charge about a $250 fee per power of attorney. So if one of you can attend, but the other can't, you can give power of attorney either to your attorney or to the other seller. You can choose who you want to have signing for you to keep the cost down. There's also an option these days of remote closings. Not everyone offers it. Not every building offers it. Not every managing agent offers it. But when they do, they also seem to charge about a $500 to $750 fee. And then nobody needs to attend, and you can pre-sign the documents either at your attorney's office in advance or on Zoom with your attorney, and then overnight them back to the closing. And then that way you don't have to change your busy schedule or your travel schedule, and everything gets closed. And if you're not physically present there, usually the way I handle that is that the money gets deposited into my attorney escrow account, and then I'll wire you those funds directly to your bank account. So we're not mailing a check over. You don't want to be mailing a bank check or even UPSing a bank check. We don't want to risk that. So I'd much rather the funds be in my escrow account and send you a direct wire. So there's certainly ways that if you can't attend, everything can be accomplished these days. And please don't feel worried about it. Just tell your attorney in advance so we can get those procedures in place for you.
Agreed. I think, and that is, as much as anything, the message that we hope that you will take from this is that really communication is key. Don't worry if somebody has gone through a process and it's been a certain kind of a way and you think, oh, I don't want to have to do that. There's a lot of room for us to customize this process so that it really works for you. And also your needs might change over the course of this process. You may start by saying, I absolutely need to get $500,000 out of it or I'm not selling. But then you get offered a fantastic job and actually you say, well, you know what, I'm willing to settle for a little bit less if we can move this a little bit more quickly. Like your life is going to continue to change as you go through this process. Keep us apprised of that so that we are able to make any kind of adjustments that need to be made in order for this process to be as low stress as it possibly can for you. We know it's never going to be no stress, but really keeping those channels of communication open, working with people that you trust and who, like, you can text me at 2:00 in the morning with a concern that you have or something new that's come up. And I may not answer you at 2:00 in the morning, but I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can.
Don't laugh. I may actually answer you at 2 in the morning. People make fun of me. I'm more likely going to answer you then because I don't have 700 other emails going on. But yes, this real estate and the working world overall has just become a 24-hour process. We're not encouraging you to text us at 2 a.m., but sometimes you might actually still get a response.
It's true. It's true. I often awake in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and then I'll check my emails, and I'll be much more happy if I have a text from you. But I think that's really the most of it. In conclusion, we're going to send you some more resources, a couple more links in the chat. We will also follow up and send you a copy of this recording. And we have a little time for questions if anybody has any. I haven't seen any show up in the chat, but if anybody wants to ask questions here, feel free to do so. But otherwise, you will have our contact information. Reach out to us. That consultation is free. We're not going to charge you for it. We really love doing this work. I know from doing this with Michelle, it's like it is such an honor to be part of this process in people's lives. It
It
is
really
one of
is.
the most meaningful things that is going to happen to you this year or maybe for this decade. And it's really a gift to be invited into this process with people. So
To be
we take
invited
it
into your home.
seriously.
Yeah, your home is so personal. And the fact that you're sharing this personal process with us, we treat each and every client and each and every sale just like it is that personal and like it is our own. So please, you see our contacts below, just like Tina said, please let us know what we could do to help you. I see that you're asking about capital gains. So I had spoken a little bit about it earlier, but I could certainly happy to touch on that again. I believe the federal threshold for capital gains is if you are clearing over $250,000 as a single or $500,000 as a married couple, at that point you owe capital gains. But if it's less than that on your gain, so if you bought at 500 and you're selling for 700 and there's only 200,000 in gain, I don't believe you owe any capital gains tax. New York, I'm not sure of their calculation, but believe it's pretty similar, the capital gains exclusion. While we advise on it and while I can help you with forms, I generally send people to their accountant because everyone's financial statuses are different or how they're filing their taxes. So I am not an expert on the tax law, but I do know that their capital gains are triggered after that 250 for an individual and 500 for a married couple. When you have LLCs or trusts or estates, different thresholds are involved. So I'd much rather you get the right advice, but my advice is to speak to your accountant who will give you the right advice.
And another thing that your accountant can help you with, but we're happy to talk about in the more in the abstract, is there's the purchase price of your home, but that is not the only part of the cost basis of your home when you're assessing what your capital gains are. So some of it has to do with work that you've done on the home, how your accountant has accounted for that over the course of your home ownership is going to be a factor.
Correct. They're
If
going to
there's
look at depreciation that you've taken, depreciation values, renovations, closing costs actually from when you purchased your home and closing costs from when you're selling, the broker fees and the transfer taxes, a lot of that can sometimes come into play to calculate actually what your real gain is. Generally, I send my clients to their accountant with a worksheet and have them come back to me with that worksheet filled out.
Yes, and then the other thing is if you're selling we're talking about it's your primary residence. If you're selling an investment property, you do not have those. You're not forgiven that initial 250,000 or $500,000 in profit.
That's correct. But that's when you might, again, speak to your accountant about doing a 1031 exchange, which means that if you can sell this property and identify a new property to purchase within 90 days, you can then roll over the gains into the new property and not pay capital gains tax right now. So 1031 is a great vehicle for tax planning. Again, I defer to your accountants on it, but we certainly handle as the attorneys the 1031 transaction. And we do the paperwork and all the legal work for it. But as far as what it's going to save you, your accountant will tell you if that's worth it to you, but you don't need to bring in an accountant on the deal and pay them to do any of the legal work. Your attorneys will handle the 1031.
And again, this is something that's great to, if you're not planning on selling immediately, this is something that's really great to work through with your accountant now, because it may change. You may have some assumptions about what your sort of net return is going to be, like what the size of that check is that you're going to be able to walk away with. And there may be things that your accountant brings up that we can't take into consideration. So talking to them now, I think is really helpful. Another thing, like I own a 2-family home. I live in 2/3 of it. I rent out 1/3 of it. I am not going to get the capital gains exemption on the entirety of my home. So there are like important, they're just like, every single
There's
home
so
is
many
different.
nuances.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's not a one size fits all answer to that question. And while that might be a little bit unsatisfying, I think the good news is you can talk to your accountant about it. That's great, Michelle. You have a worksheet for it. That's something that we don't have. So that's helpful.
Yes, I'll connect with you guys offline on that.
Okay, great. Excellent. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, as we mentioned. And thanks for sticking it out. I know it's a huge amount of information to process in a short period of time, but we're happy to go through any questions you might have in depth offline.